When we look at all the games that have come out over the last few years, I think NieR is in a world of its own due to its more mind-boggling atmosphere it brings. Today, I'm going to be doing my review of NieR Automata. And before we get into this review, we are going to be talking about a few spoilers here and there, but I will not spoil anything from route C to E, but everything else will more than likely be talked about. Other than that, let's get into this, shall we? Let's begin with the story of NieR Automata. NieR Automata takes place in the future where humanity has been pushed out by machine life forms from another world. In the hopes of reclaiming the planet, the human resistance created a group of androids called Yorah and sent them back to the planet in a wage of a battle against these invaders, and with the hope that humanity can return to Earth. The story of NieR Automata is basic from the outside perspective, but when you start to play the game, you see it's not all that basic at all. It's a very thought-provoking story with many twists and turns that make the story more engaging and something you want to keep playing to figure out what happens next. Now, NieR Automata needs to be played through multiple times in order to get the full grasp of the story. Routes A to B are during the same time frame, and the difference between them is you switch up the character that you play as, and you get to play from their perspective of events that happened during those routes. While route C to E is a completely different story from A to B and takes place after A to B's routes. Now, some people may hear that and just hate that you have to replay the game in order to get the full grasp of the story. But listen, I think it's well worth it, and each route differs from one another. I love routes A to B, and I thought C to E couldn't beat it, no way. But I was completely wrong. For me, each route got better, somewhat better than the last. One problem I did have though with NieR's story is I wish some things were more fleshed out. There's some parts in the story that were touched on and left very open or unfinished, and it leaves the player trying to piece things together, these open-ended parts together. Let's move on to the characters of NieR Automata. The three main characters that you can play as are 2B, 9S, and A2. Let's first look at 2B. 2B is the face of this game because, well, she has some great aspects. All joking aside, 2B is the first character you can play as during the Route A. And she starts off as a very hard-headed person. She's a person by the book, which means she follows anything she is told to do and doesn't break any of the rules that are set for her. But as you play more into the game, this hard shell of hers breaks away little by little, and her true self comes to light. I would say about near halfway through Route A, she becomes more kind-hearted and becomes more interested in the world around her. Also down the stretch of the game, you can see how she changes through the conversations she has with 9S, which makes some great character interactions between the two. As much as I love 2B as a character, her overall story isn't well done or well written, from my personal opinion. At the end of Route C, we learned that there is more to her than what meets the eye, and the game didn't really touch upon this until the very end of the game. And I feel like if we truly learned about her past and what she was like, we get like why she was designed, but I wish they would flesh it out a little bit more than just like at the end, this is what she really was meant for. And if they were to really dive into it or flesh it out, we would understand why she acted the way she does at the beginning of the game and why she talks to 9S the way she does. Now let's look at 9S. You can play as 9S during the B route, and he first comes off as a very kind-hearted person, a person who is more interested in the world around him, the exact polar opposite of how 2B starts off as. As time moves on, he grows more curious of the world and wants to know more about how the humans lived when they used to live on Earth. But during routes C and D, this kind-hearted person breaks away and slowly just fades into non-existence. 9S is probably one of the more realistic characters in this game, because during these routes C and D, he shows us what it's like to have so much bottled up inside of you and how it slowly eats you away. This more gentle, kind-hearted character who has grown a lust for revenge, and nothing's going to get in his way of getting that revenge that he seeks out for. 9S is probably one of my more favorite characters in NieR Automata because he is the more fleshed out of the characters in the game, and we basically have learned everything we needed to know about him and what he has done, and he's probably more realistic to a degree. And the last character we get to play as is A2. We first get to meet A2 about, I would say, 70% of the way through Route A, and she makes a grand entrance for everyone. During the first encounter, we don't get to know much about her. just that she's an android that needs to be destroyed. You won't be able to do much to her at first as she flees the battle when you first face her, but you get to play as A2 doing Route C. At first, like 2B, she comes off as a hard-headed person that keeps to herself, but this too fades away over time. She becomes more understanding of the world and she wants to help it out in any way she can. Like 2B, A2 suffers the same problem with her backstory. It's not well touched upon and it hurts her overall character, because during Route A and C, we learn bits and pieces of her past, as well as reading some reports about her during the main game. But the thing is, these things are never really, fleshed out as well. They're just only hinted at. And it sucks because like 2B, they're both good characters. I just wished, they were more fleshed out the way they were. Side characters can hurt a game if they aren't well done. But thank goodness NieR Automata, most of the side characters are very good. Pods 4-2 and 153 are great support units, and they add great and funny dialogue as we play the game. Adam and Eve are great antagonists for the game as they both differ from one another, Eve being more simple-minded and childlike, while Adam is the cool collected one and want to understand what life really is and what it's all about. Pascal is an interesting character as she is a person who wants to bring peace between the androids and the machines. The commander is the leader of the Yorah units and has a lot about her that wasn't really touched upon. And if we got to know these things, we could really understand what were the reasons for some of the actions that were done throughout the game. Devla and Popla are very unique characters in their own way, and their backstory tells us why they choose to fight, and I love these characters even though they don't, they're in the game for a little bit, but these characters are very adorable and they're very interesting to say the least. And there are so many other side characters that I feel like I could touch upon, but I feel like I spent enough time just talking about characters in general at this point. So now let's just go into the gameplay and graphics. NieR Automata throws you into the game and teaches you the basics of the game. And after that, it's up to you to figure out the rest, which I personally find to be the best thing possible. I love these type of games that, they teach you the basic concept of the game, how to fight, how to run, how to lock on, all that jazz, but they won't hold your hand throughout the whole game. I really enjoyed that, and it made the game that much more fun to me to figure out. The gameplay for Automata offers some of the best out there in the combat. It's fast and flows great, and not only that, you can change up the way you play. If you play as 2B or A2, you can choose up to 2 weapons, which can determine how you play. Want to be fast, like you want to have real fast movements and kill enemies real quickly? Pick 2 short swords. Want to deal a ton of damage in exchange for speed? Have 2 big swords. Want a kind of a mix of both between damage and speed? Pick 1 short sword and 1 big sword, etc, etc. There are a lot of weapons you can mix and match and adjust it to your playstyle. As 9S, he can only use 1 weapon at a time, but he has this hacking feature which allows you to hack into machines, have them help you, you can control them, or you can just simply blow them up, or just deal a certain amount of damage to them. The gameplay for Automata is great and makes the game that much more fun to play. From a graphics end, Automata is just outright beautiful to look at. Everything in the world looks alive and it's very eye-opening and very pleasing to look at. The one thing that I do have a problem with though, since Automata is a semi-open world, it does suffer from frame drops from time to time, but those only happen when you enter a new area on the map, such as if you first enter the Forest Kingdom, you may suffer frame drops, but once you stay in the area, you won't suffer it anymore. Other than that, Automata is very beautiful and the gameplay is just outright amazing. Finally, let's talk about the sounds and the music of the game. The voice acting done was great for NieR Automata, and the people who played them did a great job. The sounds of the world around you are so good and it feels like you're almost there. For example, the Forest Kingdom, you can kind of hear things bushing around and stuff, and it just makes you, feel like you're inside the forest. But the one thing that stands out from NieR the most for me, from this perspective and from sound and music, is the soundtrack itself. I loved most of Automata's soundtrack. I loved almost all of the soundtrack for Automata, and it's one of the few gaming soundtracks where I feel like the whole thing is great. Also, when the music plays, it just feels so connected to that certain area where the music's playing. and I feel like it's probably one of the only games to ever do something like that. Now let's sum up everything here, and by putting everything into the pros and cons. The cons are 2B and A2 lack a bad or not really fleshed out backstory. Some of the parts of the story should have been more better developed, and there's small frame drops here and there. As for the pros, there's great characters. All 3 main characters you get to play as are amazing. It's an okay story, it has amazing gameplay and graphics, and it definitely has an amazing soundtrack. The pros really do outweigh the cons, and that's why NieR Automata gets a 9 out of 10 for me. It's a great game overall, it's very thought-provoking, has great characters, and has one of the best soundtracks to this date. It's an early candidate for Game of the Year for me, and it's earned that right, and I think this game might break into my top favorite games I've ever played. I hope you enjoyed this review, and if you liked it, let me know below, as I will try to answer any questions you might have.